Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We're going to have a different type of show today. Usually we talk about principles and things like that. Today we're going to talk about liberty and libertarianism with Clint Russell from Liberty Lockdown Podcast and a number of other things. How's it going?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. Always fun talking about my favorite pastime, human liberty.
So I'm not sure most people really know much about the background of libertarianism and how, a lot of it evolved, I guess, from Austrian economics and things like that, and right. Murray Rothbard and his writings. But I think it's, if you lose all the definitions, right, and all the names of the players involved, to me it has always seemed like the most quintessential version of American ideal in politics, right?
I agree. I think it is the American ideal. It's, peace and prosperity and non-intervention. Like many of these ideas are foundational to the formulation of our nation. So the fact that these ideas are now anathema to the point that, the CIA, the former CIA, John Brennan, lists us as potential domestic extremists, it just demonstrates how far away we are from, the original concept of America.
Very bizarre, yeah. I've never been much of a fan of politicians, because they're the worst people on earth. But I do wonder. So let's start from the beginning. Tell me about what libertarianism is.
Sure. It's at its core. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, so there's some variations within our camp. There's more left-leaning anarchists that believe in essentially communism, but voluntary communism, which I don't believe that communism is ever voluntary, because if you're going to require that everyone pool their assets against their will, that's not really voluntarism. That's not libertarianism, and there's no property rights involved. I think that at its core, libertarianism is about property rights. You own yourself and you own your possessions, and the state has no moral authority to remove either from you. So bodily autonomy when it comes to vaccine mandates, obviously that was completely unconstitutional, but it was also against human liberty. And in my opinion, war criminal level stuff. So that at its core, it's about property rights. Beyond that, it's kind of in alignment with classical liberalism, free speech, non-interventionism. That's about it. I mean, it's a pretty simple, straightforward approach. It's kind of a do unto others as you'd like to have done unto you.
Yeah, I like, it's certainly a thinking man's game. It's not one of those microwave one size fits all, no effort on your part required kind of ideologies.
That is true.
I think a lot of people associate libertarianism with a pie in the sky, just like communism, right? It's like the general argument that it's never been done correctly, and that's why, are from the side of the apologist, and then from the side of the critic, it's like, well, it can't be done correctly because it requires active buy-in from everybody involved, and that's just not going to happen. How does that work in an anarcho-capitalist situation?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that are globalist libertarians that believe, human liberty must be defended all over the globe. I am not one of them. I am of the belief that it is incumbent upon each of us as the individual, with our family, neighbors, our community, to dictate what kind of worldview we want to exist in. So I would greatly prefer to see a handful of states in America that still hold on to the foundational principles of property rights, and a small, extremely minimal state that I would like to see them break off and be their own separate nations, and allow those that believe, as most in California or New York do, that they want to have an overpowering state that is, capable of grave injustice, that's their preference. I still believe in human liberty even when I think people are wrong. I think that you should have that right, but I also think you have absolutely no capacity to wield that power over me as someone who has never agreed to this social contract that you talk about so often. So I am most interested in just being amongst people that see the world the same way I do. And this is why the Free State Project in New Hampshire has been a pretty significant success for the libertarian community, where a bunch of libertarians have essentially used New Hampshire as a pilgrimage, where tens of thousands of them have congregated to try and take over the political establishment there.
And how, aside from that, and we'll talk about the Free State Project in a moment, but aside from moving to one specific location where everybody kind of agrees on this, how do you address people? Like, I live in Texas,
Right.
and I'm not sure, like, it is kind of a live and let live state for the most part, except for on abortion, which I don't agree with. But frankly, I just don't think it's any of my fucking business. But how do you address people that participate? That don't want to participate in that type of government. That is to say, small, limited, libertarian style, representation that has things like term limits and very limited power, right? Like the government essentially, like we employ bureaucrats instead of politicians, I guess would be the situation here. But how do you address people like that don't want to participate in an anarcho-capitalist or libertarian style government?
Yeah, well, the anarcho-capitalists believe in really fierce property rights, so they believe in borders. You have the capacity to inform people that want to come in and create some sort of communist hellhole that you're not welcome here. I mean, that's really it. So I think that would really be, if we were to actually do away with the state, that's actually what you would see develop. I mean, this is not going to happen, but this is probably what would happen if that were the case, is that you would have people that share my belief system or a variant, that want to live close to each other and create rules and restrictions for that area. And if you agree to them, then you're welcome to stay. And if you change your mind, then you're welcome to leave. So I think that's how you would deal with people like that. Obviously, also, libertarians are huge, Second Amendment gun rights people. So ultimately, if you have someone that's violent, that's trying to, come onto your property, you have every right to defend that. So I think that would be the answer to it.
And in this scenario where people are free to come and go as they want, what right does a libertarian or an anarcho-capitalist have to tell them to leave if they don't follow the rules of that area?
Oh, no, people aren't welcome to come and go as they please.
Okay.
Some libertarians believe in open borders. I am not one of them. I think that property rights are supreme, far above your right as a human being to go wherever you want. Any libertarian doesn't really believe that at the end of the day, because if they believe that, then they believe that people have a right to just come into their home. They don't believe that. They believe that they have property rights, and unless they're some sort of anarcho-communist, they're just lying to themselves if they say that open borders are more in alignment with a libertarian worldview. This couldn't be further from the truth. There is no perfect libertarian answer to the border situation, but people are absolutely not welcome to free and come and go as they please. My property is my property, and I will defend it life and limb.
I guess in this scenario, though, I meant more like, let's just say a county inside of a state decided to be libertarian. And, as such, maybe there's somebody that already lives there that doesn't like that. Do they just got to fuck off, or how does that work? I mean, what right do you have to tell them to leave?
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't really have that right to tell them to leave if they already own property there. I think this comes down to really more of a flaw in democracy, or the concept of majoritarian rule, more broadly, that because the majority now believes something that the minority doesn't, that the minority is asked out. They gotta deal with it. But that's the name of the game. I mean, I was born and raised in San Diego, California, spent 35 years there. And then during lockdowns, I fled to Florida. So sometimes, when when your environment becomes untenable because you're surrounded by a bunch of lunatics, which have voted for a bunch of scumbag criminals, well, you got to move on. You got to go elsewhere. And I feel like, well, on the inverse, that's the same principle. If you find it so unbearable that I am interested in, free trade and like self-defense, and you think that you can't live around me, even though I'm a totally kind, peaceful person. All right, well then leave. I don't know what else to say.
Sure. One of the questions I get a lot, or comments, I guess, is that it's like, yeah, this all sounds like a good idea, but it requires, one, it will require that most people participate for it to be successful, which I think is true of any system, right? Because I think that's kind of a pedantic argument, because Plato said 2,000 years ago, or longer ago, I guess, that if you refuse to take part in your own governance, you're doomed to be ruled by fools, right? This is not a new idea, that any system of government requires participation on behalf of the citizen to function properly, right?
Yeah, and ironically, it's usually the conservatives that say that. And it's like, well, the conservatives have had their political apparatus, ripped from underneath them because they did not get involved in politics. And I don't blame them. I'm one of them to a certain extent. I was an entrepreneur and a business owner, and I was not interested in politics. And I was just like, these things will work themselves out. I was wrong, man. I was dead wrong. Like, you have to take, ownership of your own community, your own town, your own city, whatever. And if you don't, well, then expect people that have really malicious intent to do so. And that's what happened to the state of California. That's what happened to the state of New York and many, many others. So, but yes, I obviously I do agree. If you don't have buy-in from the people that you're around into maintaining civilization, well, then it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, I think it's like broken window theory almost, right? It's like when people look around and see things are shitty, there is a tendency to just disassociate yourself, because nobody wants to play for the losing team, even though it affects every single part of every day of your life. People will still be like, "Oh, I didn't vote for that guy, so I don't give a shit." It's like, all right, cool, man. That's one way to go through life, but just realize that you're fucking capitulating to the people that are trying to control your life.
Yeah, and they are controlling your life in a way that I don't think many of us even understood until about 3 years ago. And we're like, holy shit, they have a lot of control over our lives. I had no idea a state governor could just decide that my business is shut down for over a year. Like,
yeah.
Or that I'm forced to take a medical treatment. Otherwise, I can't ever work again. I was self-employed, so that didn't apply to me, but it applied to millions of people in this country. I mean, we found out that we do not exist in the land of the free anymore. So as far as I'm concerned, as opposed to bitching about it, I am interested in getting involved. And if I can't prevail in defending the state of Florida or the state of Texas or New Hampshire, well, then maybe I have to leave the country. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, but I'm going to fight until the bitter end. And until I feel like there's really all hope is lost, I think that human liberty is extraordinarily hard fought. There's tens of thousands, I mean, really more than that, of years of just absolute human suffering. And then you have this incredible period where you have enlightenment, and you have this belief that free speech and open dialogue and trade amongst one another is the best formulation for society. And then you have these incredible savages that get into a boat and they spend a full month just getting scurvy and praying to God that they make it to this land that they've never even been to, but they've heard good things about. And they get there and they're like, all right, let's give this a shot. Let's see what we can do here. Let's take all of the lessons of all of our failings in governance of the past, and let's remedy it with this new model. And then 250 years later, that incredible nation becomes the empire of the world, and it is ultimately deeply bankrupt and deeply corrupt and ruled by criminals. I'm not willing to give up on what America was. What America is, I have completely given up on. It is a disaster. So I think that it's incumbent upon the people that actually see the world how I do to stand up, to stop being so afraid of being ostracized. It's like being called a racist or whatever nonsense label that they put on you just because you think that everything that's happening today is absolutely insane. You're not wrong. It is insane. It's clearly insane. The freaking former president of the United States just got indicted. They want to put him in prison for hundreds of years, and CNN, Rachel Maddow just drops his press conference as he's trying to make the defense for why he shouldn't be put in prison for the rest of his life. We've never had an American president that's even been in this position, and they won't carry his press conference because they're certain that in his defense he will potentially lie. I mean, this is just not the America that I grew up in, and I don't think it's overstating it to say that.
No, I don't think. Well, it's not a. I don't think we've got a lot of problems about defining. People refer to things as America or our democracy and stupid shit like that all the time. Those are all meaningless phrases to me. It's just nonsense. It's marketing.
Right. Branding.
Yeah, but to me, and I think this is a true statement. America is not the government or politicians or even the geography. It's the idea that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the ultimate inoculation against tyrannical bullshit, right? I mean, that's kind of
Bingo.
what we're all that's kind of what we were all focused on back in the day. Now, there were assholes in the group of founding fathers as well. Like John Adams was kind of a cunt. Alexander Hamilton was a massive piece of shit. But there were a lot of guys that, like, Thomas Jefferson's a pretty good dude, aside from fucking slaves and shit like that. But at least his ideology and Ben Franklin's ideology were pretty on point. But that's what it is, right? It's like it's the idea that has been our guidepost for a very long time. So it's like America is this, and the idea was, we know we're not there yet, but we're going to try every day to get to this point, and then we're going to get there and maintain this point, which is to say, liberty only exists if it exists for everybody and all the time, right? That was kind of the guidestone. Now we're kind of fucked, right? I mean, we're all over the place, and it's just been these bureaucracies and political dynasties have grown into it's just feudalism at this point, right? They only exist to extract wealth from the American population. That's really the only reason they exist anymore. And I wonder.
Well, it's fascism, really.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, it relatively recently, in the last 70 or 80 years, became fascism once corporate America got involved in everything. Maybe you could say in the early part of the 20th century with the timber industry and stuff, but certainly now.
Big time now.
And I wonder, so I've heard this comment a lot, and I'd like to get your reaction to it. A lot of people have said to me, if we were starting a country from scratch, libertarianism would be a really good idea. But implementing it now in the middle of this, I don't see how that's even possible. What's your response to that?
I'm actually fine with that. I think that's a fair concern. Like, Ron Paul, for instance, who's kind of the scion of our ideology, he has said many times that, to end the Federal Reserve overnight and to have all of our currency become worthless because we're going to some sort of decentralized, privately ran currency system, like, that would be catastrophic. So there's nothing wrong with incrementalism. There's nothing unprincipled about saying, yes, the end goal is this, but the intermediate steps have to be this. I think that's totally fine. So, I agree with people. Like, for instance, many libertarians talk about open borders. As I've already said, I'm not one of them, but I've always said that if you want to get to a world where that's even a possibility, well, then you have to end the war on drugs, because you can't have the cartels that are armed to the teeth and funneling drugs across the border, as well as human beings. You have to end the war on terror, because you can't be bombing, a dozen nations over the past 20 years and have all of these people that are absolutely furious with us that will come across our border and, commit acts of terrorism if the border were open. Like, you have to take these things in steps. We didn't get to this disastrous point overnight, and we're not going to remedy it overnight. So, that being said, though, if my only option was, do I smash this button and end the Fed today, or do I keep us where we're at right now? I'm smashing the button, but I'm a radical like that. A lot of libertarians probably would say, no, don't do that. But I just think that ultimately, tyranny deserves to be ended. So if I have a light switch I can flick, I'm going to flick it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote my master's thesis on how our border policy and the war on drugs has created a criminal smuggling class that's made everything far more dangerous, and nothing's gotten better. And it's essentially a powder keg, right? I mean, anytime anything goes wrong vis-a-vis border policy or particularly when there's humanitarian crises in Central and South America. We always bear the brunt of it. Right now, it just happens to be about 85 million people overdosing on fentanyl a year, right? But this is just the latest, and a lot of fucking outcomes that were easily avoidable. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And now it's getting particularly violent for even tourists in Mexico, which is not great for them. It's certainly not great for us. But, you know, to that point on the border, I know that, you know, federal authority is something that I don't think the federal government should even exist, frankly. But let's move beyond
Preach.
that. Let's move beyond that. It's the federal government does exist, and it's going to continue to exist probably. But I don't think
until hyperinflation. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. We'll see. I don't think that the federal government should be in charge of a state's right to secure their own border. I mean, that seems insane to me. You know, I live in Texas, so Governor Wheelchair here has tried to do a few things, although he's kind of a pussy about it, but he's tried to do a few things to defend the border against this invasion that's happening. And then whenever he loses a lawsuit, he does tend to capitulate a little bit, which I would just tell him to go fuck themselves, frankly. But
take that DeSantis angle to it.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? But it is, to me, this. People ask me all the time, like, how do you fix what's going wrong right now? And I would like to run this by my main theory is that the only way to block federal power is to solve problems that they're trying to solve without them, right? Their power comes from the need people have of them. You know, it's no very, very little difference between this or any general issue with the government and, let's say, the welfare state over the last 60 years or so, where, you know, particular groups of in the country have been on the tit, right? And
exactly
just given enough to keep their head above water, but never to achieve any kind of upward mobility, right? Like, it's very intentionally done that way. But
the states are welfare queens.
Correct, yeah. So I think people ask me how to reverse all this and how to stop it. I've always thought that taking over local governments and then beginning the process of nullification, which has plenty of common and case law common and case law precedent, and it's not too long ago actually that it's been happening. Like California, Massachusetts specifically on weed and gay marriage, right?
Yep.
Over the past 20 years, have done this very successfully.
The left set the precedent.
Yeah.
Why is the right not using it? I have no idea.
Well, the right is there. I don't think there is a right in this country, to be honest. Not in the political.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Not in the political establishment. I don't think that's a real thing. But
yeah, controlled up.
Yeah, that's always been my position. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. It's like win some local elections, take over a city or take over a county, and then tell the state we're not paying any taxes. We're not doing any shit that you say to do until you stop sending our money to the federal government. Right.
Bingo. Exactly right. And I mean, that's. I'm a member of the Mises Caucus, which took over the Libertarian Party. Dave Smith was kind of our leader in that takeover. So we run the LP now. In fact, I ghostwrite for the LP national Twitter account. And if you've noticed over the past year since we took over, we talk a lot about this. The whole idea of the Mises Caucus is a decentralized revolution. We want as low level power as possible, but we want to make it really solid. So we want to go after sheriff's offices and mayoral races and city council and try and create kind of enclaves of human liberty where we can actually push back and start to work towards getting away from federal power. So I think your vision is exactly what the Libertarian Party is about today. It may not have always been that. I think many people were delusional and they thought that federal elections were winnable. I just think that's crazy. I mean, if you don't have massive corporate donors that you've sold your soul to, the odds of getting into that arena is slim to none, unless you're Ron Paul and you're just some, beautiful doctor that's birthed everyone in your town and they're going to vote for you regardless of your crazy ideology. You don't have much chance. So I think you're exactly right. Like that's what we have to do is we have to focus on 10th Amendment and states' rights and defang the federal government and ultimately defund it from the state level. And then after that, you would actually have people that can see. I think that what's important, and the reason that libertarianism is kind of comes across as this like utopic vision, is because people haven't been able to see it tried. Like it's very important that you can actually prove that your ideas are not crazy. Communists have had their shot at their ideas and they suck in reality. Libertarians haven't really had their ideas, and the only time that they did, it was basically the formulation of America, and it worked out pretty fucking awesome, right? So I would like to see us give that another go, but on a smaller scale, just because I think it's unrealistic to go large scale and try and reform the federal government. But yes, local level and states' rights is the answer to the border crisis, the drug crisis, all of it.
I do feel like most of the time, whenever I see, I guess maybe you could call them casual libertarians, right? Anytime there's some popular libertarian figure, they always try to elevate them to like, oh, like you should run for president. Like, why? What the fuck would the president do to make the United States more libertarian? You know what I mean? Right. Aside from, I guess, technically speaking, you could start canceling departments. Which would be fucking hilarious, by the way. I mean,
that's what we would do if we got the power. But to your point, it's not going to happen. No. Like the whole reason that we run a presidential candidate every cycle is simply because it's an incredible marketing opportunity. Like that, if you're spending if you're blowing your whole wad on a presidential campaign, well, then you definitely have fucked up. Like that's not what you're supposed to be doing. But the whole reason that we got involved with the Mises Caucus and took over the Libertarian Party is because most of us wanted to see Dave Smith run for president. Not because we think he can win, but because we think he's an incredible messenger that can get on the biggest, platforms like Joe Rogan. He's been on, I don't know, 9 times now or something, and wake people up to our worldview, to let them know that, there is a sane answer to all of these things. And we actually happen to believe that we have it. So that's really what the presidential campaign for the Libertarian Party is about. It's just about the opportunity to get on big platforms and say the most courageous version of the truth. And Dave does it better than anybody.
Are there any, I'm not familiar with any personally, but are there any, independently wealthy people who are financing any kind of Libertarian Party campaigns, not nationally necessarily, but statewide or local elections?
I'm not familiar with them, but I know that there's a handful. It's tragic, but here's the reality. Libertarians are very financially savvy, and those of us in that arena that have made a good amount of money, we realize that if we're going to buy a politician, we're going to buy one of the duopoly candidates. Like that's the truth. So if they are buying libertarian speaking time, it's ultimately just about propaganda. It's about marketing and trying to get our ideas out there to wake more people up. So they're not going to put the majority of their money to that, and I think that they're going to put the majority of their money to Thomas Massey's reelection or Rand Paul or any of the libertarian leaning federal politicians. And I think that's what they do. I couldn't prove that. I don't know that for a fact, but as a libertarian with a decent amount of money, that's what I'd be doing. I wouldn't be putting tens of millions of dollars into, Dave Smith's presidential campaign because I think it's just a marketing, exercise. I would rather have a congressman that is actually going to vote against, the endless wars and things like that.
Mm-hmm. How many, if you know the answer to this, I'm curious, how many members of Congress how many people run for Congress in either house under the Libertarian banner each year? Because I don't see very many.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few, but I'm pretty confident that it's not every race by any stretch. I mean, the real, I only got involved with the Libertarian Party 2 years ago. Like I've been a libertarian. I'm a second gen libertarian, so I've been a libertarian my entire life. But I was very disinterested in politics. Like I was very passionate about my beliefs, but I was totally disinterested in politics. The lockdowns happen. I start Liberty Lockdown. I start to speak out. Very quickly, the Libertarian Party and all of my heroes within it, Tom Woods and Dave Smith and all these guys, they embrace me. So I've only been following the party closely for 2 years, basically. And yeah, there's not a ton of federal candidates.
Let's get back to, I want to talk about some of the principles that surround libertarianism. Ultimately, it's all about property rights, and the ultimate property right is body autonomy, right? Your ability to do what you want with your body and think whatever the fuck you want to think and say whatever you want to say as well, right?
Yep, exactly. And to defend it.
Yeah, and that's to me that's a really smart approach, because we get, I mean, look at the U.S. tax code, right? Like, trying to understand that, it's 75,000 goddamn pages or something. Anytime things get fucked up, no matter what it is, if you're I use this analogy sometimes. If you're a baseball player and your swing's fucked up, you know what I mean? You don't go out and try to participate in a home run derby to fix your swing. You break it down, go back to the fundamentals, right? It's always occurred to me that the powers that be in the American political regimes, they don't want to necessarily solve any kind of problem, right? Because anytime there's any kind of substantive disagreement between the two parties, that an industry builds up around that, whether it's abortion or poverty or drugs or social justice or whatever. Like, this for-profit industry builds itself around it. And even if you get to the point where you solve the problem, that's not okay, right? Because I've built this whole machine now. It needs to do something. And
exactly. Well, which is why they don't solve the problem.
Right. And there's this phrase, it's solve problems, don't get out the vote. And I would add to it, solve problems, don't raise campaign funds either. But it seems like, and I feel like people know this, right? There are people on the left and on the right who don't believe that the fight over like gun rights is real. They think it's bullshit. It's just like the Republicans say one thing but never do anything about it. The left says, I mean, the left says a lot. They actually try to do more stuff than the right does, for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of these problems, like the left could solve, we could collectively solve poverty relatively easily, I think. And it's not a funding issue. We've thrown hundreds, if not, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars at this over the years. At poverty, at drug addiction, at all this stuff, homelessness, and to very little effect. And the only thing I can imagine is that we just aren't trying at all to solve anything. You know what I mean? It seems that way.
Well, I think it's partially that, and it's also partially that, you know, your solution, not yours, but broadly speaking, their solution is the problem itself. You have turned towards the state to deal with cultural issues. You don't do that. That's not how it works. You have to get back to the community level. You have to actually look after your neighbors, your friends, your family, your relatives, the homeless dude that's in your church, you know, like that's sleeping there. Like, you have to focus on the local level. You have to deal with that cultural decay if you're going to alleviate these issues. And ultimately, the reason that we've gotten away from this small community, we look after our neighbors, we look after each other type of worldview, is because we have given so much of the authority and also moral authority to the state. And we say, oh, I pay my taxes. I don't have to do any of this. I don't have to look after my friends and family. But ask the government, man. You know how much taxes I paid last year? Go get a handout. That's not how you fix people. And I think that's part of the reason that we're dealing with such massive anxiety, depression, drug addiction, homelessness, is that we have given up on looking after one another. And I think that's the weird thing about people that find libertarianism, untenable, is that they're not actually, I mean, they're just expecting to cast a vote once every 4 years and everything's going to get better. Like, that's fucking crazy. Do you know how like damaged we are as a civilization right now? Like, you think that just casting a vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, for God's sakes, is going to fix all that ails? That's totally delusional behavior. But they think I'm delusional. Like, that's the really gaslighting part about this. They think the libertarians are the crazy ones. I'm like, no, I believe that we can solve these issues. And I also believe that we do have a moral, reason, maybe not a responsibility, but certainly a moral calling to look after those that are, down on hard times. I just don't believe that the state is that answer. And I don't believe having me be robbed against my will by the federal government to alleviate this issue is moral or is the answer either. So I think that's really to get to the core of it is that we have to take more personal responsibility. Libertarianism is about personal responsibility almost as much as it is about property rights. As you were saying, we have to have buy-in. We have to have people that are actually committed to making this thing work. We've gotten lazy. I mean, really, we have. Americans broadly are just so lazy. We're not doing anything to actually fix the problems. We just bitch. We just see the homeless encampments. I mean, I fled California because it was so out of hand. But it's a long running issue, and you're absolutely right. Throwing more money at it is not the fix.
Sure. Yeah, that's man. It's tough because I feel like I've had this conversation mostly with my conservative friends, and they think that they think that well, I'll say things like this, and I believe in incrementalism as well. That's why my plan would be to take over local governments and start the process of nullification. But I do ask them, like, if the federal government just disappeared today, how would that? Let's say there wasn't. Forget about currency and stuff like that. That we, just about your day-to-day life. What exactly would change about your day-to-day life if the federal government completely disappeared right now? And the answers are varied. It's like, well, we wouldn't have people watching out to make sure that our food and water are safe and things like that. National defense, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, cool. We've only had a standing army since World War II. So
Right.
that's not something that's necessary. I don't think we should have a standing army. I think it's preposterous that we have a fucking standing army. But
The founders were just very, very against a standing army.
And I was in one. I was in it, by the way. And I still don't think
right.
it should exist. But it's like, who's going to protect us against this and that? I was like, well, the courts, here's the difference in a libertarian system where the courts are truly unbiased, meaning they don't report to the executive, or I'm sorry, they don't report to the executive branch at all, or to the legislature. The courts exist on their own. They're arbiters. Right. When a company, like a pharmaceutical company, kills a bunch of people, as they are wont to do on a regular fucking basis,
a lot.
That company gets fined out of existence completely. They don't get to pay some political donations and then keep their same name, file bankruptcy, keep the same name, and then go right back at it. Like the OxyContin producer. They got fined, $9 billion, I think, 2 years ago. Filed bankruptcy, didn't pay the fucking fine, and then just continued operating and continued producing OxyContin.
Yeah, because the biomedical research facilities and corporations own our politicians.
Correct. Yeah. So it's like all you're doing in this scenario is removing the corrupt politician from it, right? Like there still may be some corruption, but at the end of the day, you have recourse against them without a hurdle. Like I can go after them, right? And I think
well, and also just to clarify something, in a libertarian society, there would be real liability, not just in terms of financial. If you falsely market a product as safe and non-addictive, and factually, and we can prove it, that it was very highly addictive and lethally so, and you sold it to tens of millions of people that ended up becoming many of the homeless people we see on the streets today, you go to jail. You don't just lose your wealth, billionaire family. You go to prison for the rest of your life because you're responsible for the death of people. That is criminal. That is criminal liability, not civil. So, look, we don't have civil or criminal liability, and the political class is the same way. I mean, this is why it's so profound that they're actually prosecuting Donald Trump. It's like he's one of the only presidents in my lifetime that I don't think was like definitely needs to be in prison for the rest of his life. Like every other president, I'm like, put them in jail forever, please. Yeah. But that's how it works. I mean, you don't have justice. You just have political, attacks or hit squads. Like Barack Obama should absolutely be in prison for Anwar al-Awlaki, American citizen that he, assassinated from a fucking drone.
From Phoenix. He was a Phoenix guy. Grew up in Phoenix. He was an American citizen.
Yeah.
Who he radicalized Nadal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, and quite a few others, right? He's
Anwar did? I'm talking about his son. Are you talking about the 9/11 attacker?
No. Anwar al-Awlaki is he radicalized Nadal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, from like, what was that, 2010 or some shit? I don't remember what year it was.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But yeah, he was the guy in contact with him. They were planning on sending him a wife at some point because he was a fucking loser.
Okay, I didn't know that. But
Yeah, yeah. But
still, you can't execute
oh, it
American
doesn't. Yeah, it
citizens
doesn't
without a
matter. Yeah,
trial.
yeah, it
You
doesn't
know.
matter. Um,
So I
did,
just think that like there's a lot of politicians that ought to be in jail, and there's a lot of corporations and heads of corporations that ought to be in jail. In a libertarian community, they would be, but that's not where we're at.
certainly not. No, and I'm not defending Obama murdering the guy. Although, frankly, I probably would have murdered him, not with a drone strike. I would have shot him in his fucking face. But I'm a private citizen, you know what I mean? So, um, but anyways, yeah, it's people made the justification for that because he's a bad guy, and I keep telling people this. You start setting precedent like that. You start allowing people to be, just because they're called an enemy combatant and that strips their fucking citizenship and their rights away. What's going to happen when you're an enemy combatant, when you're a domestic violent extremist or whatever the fuck they're saying now, when you're a mom at a PTA meeting, say, hey, how about stop telling my kid how to suck dick, maybe, because he's fucking 7. You know what I mean?
And little do you know that there's an FBI informant that's standing to your left. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's where we're at. This is why the libertarians were so against the Patriot Act. It was like people are like, "Oh, you love fucking Saddam Hussein?" It's like, no, dumbass. I realize that if you empower the federal government to spy without any sort of, you have a secret court, you have the FISA court where you just have to go in there and get fucking 99.5% rubber stamped approval to spy on any American. It's like, well, that's a disaster. That means we have no privacy in this country. And what does that mean? It means that the federal government will eventually, once it's alleviated whatever foreign terrorism issue it's dealing with, the self-licking ice cream cone of the military-industrial complex is going to turn inward, and it's going to start looking at us. And that's what's happened.
And it is, yeah. It's. I don't know why this is such a hard point to get across to people. Maybe it's just tribalism. Maybe they're fucking stupid. But anytime there's any kind of law or even precedent set that gives power to the state or power to any organization, frankly, that has, control over other people, you have to imagine that power in the hands of your worst enemy, because eventually it will be, right? And I don't necessarily mean the opposite political party either. I mean the duopoly in general, or I think right now America is more poised to see a madman rise to power, vis-a-vis the 1930s in Germany, than ever before in our history. I don't think it would have ever been possible until now. And I look at people like Gavin Newsom. I'm like, that guy right there is dangerous. Like frankly, I think he's going to run for Senate this year. I don't know that he wants to get into this quagmire of a presidential race unless Biden trips down the stairs and is incapacitated or something. But he's got his eyes on it for sure, right?
Oh,
and
bro.
he wrecked San Francisco. He wrecked the state of California afterwards, both as vice governor or lieutenant governor and then governor. And he's coming for America. He's coming to fucking, this. He might be the most gaslighting politician I've ever seen, to be honest, because there's a very recent track record of just annihilating fucking economies. He went from what do they have, like a $29 billion surplus last year, and they just defaulted on $18.5 billion in debt this year. It's like, what the fuck, man?
I hadn't even heard that, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Look, I am a Gavin Newsom refugee. I fled California because this guy's such a disaster. I was on Timcast last week and I was just ranting at people. I was like, listen to me, America. When I tell you this guy is the most dangerous politician walking the earth today, I am not exaggerating. He will absolutely fucking wreck the United States. Like, he's already floating the concept of some new amendment to the Constitution that, gun rights or gun bans, but it's constitutional because he's getting an amendment to the Constitution. Well, he's right. It would be constitutional if you actually got 2/3 of the states to ratify or whatever requirement it takes. But if you want to see a civil war in this country, that's how you do it. You actually go after the guns. I mean, the left talks about it a lot, but if you come to all of the good old boys' houses and you say, give it up or else, it's going to be or else.
Yeah.
And I'm horrified at this guy. And I think that he's like, I never thought that America could actually see a civil war. I really didn't. But Gavin Newsom's he's a fast pass to it, dude. Like that guy is super dangerous. I am not overstating. I honestly think he's the most malicious, psychotic, vindictive, narcissistic, egotistical, just vacuous, vapid, disgusting, despicable human being on earth. So please, please, for the love of God, don't vote for him.
Well, yeah. I mean, I live in Texas and you live in Florida, so it's not going to happen in either one of these states. But
No, no, no. But I think he's going to run for president someday.
certainly someday. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced yet that he's going to run in 24. I think it would be a mistake for him personally to run in 24. To be honest, going to the Senate first and then putting some distance between him and the chaos he's created in California, and just because he doesn't have any foreign policy chops at the moment, right? Right. Usually it's hard to get. Well, there have been some governors who've been elected, Reagan and Clinton and Bush all in a row, right? Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a thing now. You at least have to have a VP that has some foreign policy chops. But anyways,
yeah, I mean, you have to have allies within the swamp, and I just don't know that he has that. But look, I think he's being groomed for it. I really do, and he clearly wants it. So I'm just saying, don't don't rest too easy. Like this guy is absolutely coming for it. So, and I never thought Joe Biden could get fucking elected president. So I am no longer willing to say, oh, it doesn't matter that he destroyed the greatest state maybe in the world. Yeah. It doesn't matter. The left, if the media tells the left to vote for him, they will fucking vote for that guy. So we'll see.
Do you think that's true if it's somebody like DeSantis instead of Trump, though? I'm not sure that people hate DeSantis as much as they hate Trump. I don't think the left gets that boost of never Trump if DeSantis runs. I mean, who knows? They're trying really hard to make him sound like a crazy fascist, but it's like maybe he is. Who the fuck? I don't know him, but it certainly doesn't appear that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. Obviously, the never Trump contingent would be deactivated somewhat with DeSantis, but the media is really capable of creating a new boogeyman very, very rapidly. I mean, if you remember, George Bush was Hitler, and Mitt Romney was Hitler, and Donald Trump was Hitler, and I assure you, they can turn DeSantis into Hitler too.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I mean, it's ironic that all these Hitlers are all right wingers instead of how Hitler was a leftist. But
right. You mean a national socialist?
Yeah,
like Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but I don't honestly. I think DeSantis, stepped on his dick with the his presidential launch on Twitter, and like he just doesn't have the charisma that Donald Trump does. And I think Trump, if he's not put in prison, is pretty much front row seat to this next election. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't really give a shit, to be honest. I mean, it's interesting to see what happens. I mean, I'll always err on the side of the person that wants to tax me less. I don't give a shit who it is, because typically that means that they want to interfere in my life less in other ways as well, right? Like people rarely buy goodwill from the public by lowering taxes just so they can become more authoritarian in other ways. Although that's what George W. Bush did. This is something that I want to ask before we get out of here. 2 questions, actually. The first is differentiate between the American left right now and libertarianism, and then do the same for the American right. Because
sure,
like the American right is no longer conservative and hasn't been for a very long time, probably since Nixon. I'm not, there's a lot of people on the right that are fanboys for Reagan, who raised taxes in 5 of the 8 years he was in office, was conducting all kinds of fucked up wars without the approval of Congress and stuff like that. Anyways, start with the left, though.
Sure. I mean, the left, and I'm speaking broadly, so any good leftists out there, calm your tits. I'm not talking about you. But broadly, the left is completely 180 degrees counter to a libertarian worldview. They don't believe in free speech or open dialogue or debate or non-interventionism. I mean, they're the fucking salivating, blood dripping down their face about World War III with Russia, because they've been psyoped into this whole Russiagate shit under Donald Trump. So in always And then they also believe in an enormous state and massive taxation, and they don't believe that, in property rights or gun rights. Like, tell me in any way that the modern left is like me. Like, I can't think of one way. So they're my enemy as far as I'm concerned, because they are, basically neo-fascists. And I'm like, but they think that I am, which is totally fucking crazy. It's like Gavin Newsom with the gaslighting you were talking about. The modern right.
Well, how do you address that though when leftist people, and I agree, there are, not to quote Donald Trump, but there are good people on both sides. Some people are
Of
just,
course.
I think
They're just not sending their best.
yeah. So a lot of people are pretty ignorant about, some certain things, but I don't think everybody out there is necessarily a nefarious character. But how do you tell somebody, like, I don't understand how a leftist could say to anybody that they're like a Nazi or that they're authoritarian, because I just want to be left the fuck alone. Leave me alone. And that, how it,
well,
like,
that makes you a Nazi.
explain to me how that makes me authoritarian, because that is literally the opposite of authoritarianism.
I couldn't explain it to you if I tried, man.
Okay.
I've been dealing with this for 3 years as I've, railed against the vaccine mandates from these people who are, used to be highly skeptical of corporate power and now believe that I should be mandated to take a corporate product at threat of my livelihood. These people are fucking out of their minds. They're just totally crazy. And as you clarified, not all. There are some people on the left that still believe in free speech. Most of them still don't believe in gun rights because they're fucking stupid. But and many of them are still against war. So, like, God bless those people. But I'm talking broadly in terms of the federal politicians that they vote into power time and time and time again. I mean, Joe Biden, they just fucking put Joe Biden into office. That dude's responsible for locking up more minorities than any American politician. How the fuck do you justify that?
And his VP ran the program in the largest state in the country. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, they're just total scumbags. The politicians are, but they vote for him. So I'm gonna put that onus on you guys. I don't know what the fuck happened to left. I mean, I do kind of know, because I've studied a lot ESG and the whole manipulation of their worldview. This kind of virtue signaling, the corporate takeover of their minds is really what happened circa 2010, Occupy Wall Street era. And now you have gay pride parades that are on top of, Halliburton or Northrop Grumman floats. They're just so stupid. The right used to be really bad. It used to be when the neoconservatives took it over, it got really, really ugly for a while. I've never agreed with them. When I was a kid, they were also the ones that were talking about, banning rap music and shit like that.
Yeah.
I didn't love that, obviously. In hindsight, it seems like very minor compared to the, incursions of my liberty that's happened as of late. But when I was a kid, I was like, dude, you guys are so freaking weak. Like, what are you talking about? But then they became like massive war hawks. And from a libertarian perspective, that's a total non-starter. They also supported the Patriot Act, and they supported spying and doing away with civil liberties and torture and trial, imprisonment without trial, and extrajudicial murder and wars that aren't declared. I mean, the right was awful, like all through the 2000s. And then, the Obama administration comes in, he implements diversity, equity, inclusion, and all this other nonsense that totally rips the soul out of this country and starts to make everyone focus on race and these immutable characteristics that we were all past, but now we're all racist because we don't want to talk about it. Okay, fine. But the right has gotten a lot better. They're the ones that are, and this tends to be what happens when either of the parties are out of political power. They kind of get back to their general belief system because they realize, oh, like this government can hurt me. This is a problem for me. So I don't want the government to be this powerful. Mm-hmm. That's when they sound more libertarian, because they realize it. Oh, I'm being completely trampled. I'm completely at the mercy of this completely corrupt totalitarian regime. And it'd be nice if the government was not powerful enough to do that. So I'm like, all right, you guys sound good. You want free speech. You want debate. You want bodily autonomy. You don't want these wars. You're skeptical of the propaganda that's leading us towards World War III with Russia. Awesome. So as of today, I am much more in alignment with the right than I am the left, but it hasn't always been that way.
Sure. The early 2000s were kind of challenging, to be honest, although it was, I think that was the beginning of the uniparty bullshit. Because everybody kind of had their hand in the cookie jar there. I've been asking people who are like, I'm a lifelong Republican. I vote Republican no matter what. I'm like, all right, cool. and you believe in small government, right? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so your guy Bush presided over the largest expansion of the federal government in American history. Does that ring any bells? Remember that one? Remember the Patriot Act, right? You remember that
Yeah.
stuff? Like he gave not only the government more broadly immense power that it never had before, he gave himself, the office of the president, immense power that it never had before. And, what the fuck? So how do you, I mean, I just, I think that one of the better ways to debate this stuff is just to ask people questions. Like, are you okay with what happened? And like, no, but I agree more with the right than the left. Like,
Exactly.
really? Do you? Do you?
Yeah. I mean,
Did you in 2003? Did you agree more with the right than the left? Like based on the Overton window right now, if you were able to pluck yourself out of space and time and put yourself in 2003, you would probably have agreed more with the dissenting left than you do with the right on most issues, as a matter of fact, right now.
yeah,
So what
it's
does
a good
that
point.
say about modern culture? That we're still playing this tribalism game. We're on the same team we were, even though the team has changed. It's unrecognizable. So
Yeah.
how does that make any fucking sense?
Well, it's perfect that you picked 2003 because, it's a tried and true, story as old as time that the conservatives are always holding on to the victories of the progressives from 20 years ago. And that's really where we're at. The right is pretty cool with gay marriage and all this other shit that was, they were fighting. They're cool with, ending the wars, and they're cool with drug decriminalization. And many of them are now. So, I'm good with the conservatives of that worldview, of that 2003 leftist worldview. Like, I think that was a fairly decent balance, especially opposing the Patriot Act. And, but that's just not where the left is today. And the left has come, they've completely been, they've just gone off the deep end, man. And I honestly think that like, it's no longer optional to sit on the sideline and oppose them. Like it's existential. Like they are sprinting headlong into a nuclear exchange with the most well-armed nuclear power on Earth. And they can't look, Russia can't fuck with us militarily aside from their nuclear arsenal. So what does that mean? That means that their only option to defend themselves, if we have politicians that are crazy enough to do it, is their nuclear arsenal. Do we want to play that game? Because we are playing that game actively today. And I feel like not enough people take this seriously. I mean, you were in the military. You tell me, am I overstating the concern? Because it scares the shit out of me.
You're definitely right that Russia can't fight us militarily. As a matter of fact, I would say China can't either. China would be able to. They would be able to fuck with our electronic infrastructure more than Russia, and that would be a problem as far as battlefield preparation goes and things like that. But just straight up military strategy and equipment, we would level China as well, right? But
I
that
think so.
but we're beyond that point, right? Like we're not going to get into a ground war with a superpower. This just it hasn't happened for fucking what 80 years. It's not going to happen, and if it does,
Yeah.
that's it, right? We're fucked at that point.
No, I think it's nuclear at that point.
Yeah, and it depends. I mean, luckily, I think that the Kremlin as a whole is a lot more reasonable than people give him credit for. And I don't mean Putin. I think Putin he thinks he's Peter the Great. He wants to reestablish the Russian Empire and blah, blah, blah. He's just some fucking dipshit politician. You know what I mean? This one just happens to be a murderer from the old KGB. But there are a bunch of dissenting people around him all over the place in the Kremlin. Like I understand, people think that it's a truly authoritarian regime, and they try really hard to do that. But Russia's incompetent in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like it's not nearly as in control as people like to fucking project. Like, oh, he's the fucking czar of Russia. No, he's not. He's a fucking politician. You know what I mean? And there are a lot of
I mean,
people stopping him from
he
doing shit he wants to do right now from within inside his own fucking government.
yeah. I mean, he's the dictator at the pleasure of the oligarchy.
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
the oligarchy really runs shit. So
And they care about the bottom line. They don't give a fuck about Peter the Great. They care about their bank account. You know what I mean?
exactly.
So it's
but,
like,
but they will profit if they conquer in Ukraine. But
sure.
look, I've just debated Destiny about this a couple months ago. I read Scott Horton's book, Provoked. It hasn't been out yet. It'll be out soon. But Scott Horton's probably the greatest, scholar in the anti-war libertarian realm. And this thing is a fucking masterpiece. It's just quote after quote of American diplomats that are detailing all of the ways in which the American, deep state or State Department fomented this war, this conflict, and it was avoidable. So, well, I agree with you. I don't have any affinity for Putin. I think he's a fucking scumbag, but
Mm.
it doesn't change the fact that I am not interested in World War III over which corrupt government rules the eastern portion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'm just fucking not, dude.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. It's crazy that we're doing it, and then you add on top of that all of the corruption that exists within the Ukrainian government itself, and then on top of that, you have a sitting president whose son was making God knows how much money, you know, just shilling bullshit deals there for the political establishment. It's like it's so deeply corrupt and crazy, but it has existential stakes at the end of the day. So nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it's really stupid. I don't think there's a whole lot of chance that a nuclear war would happen, frankly, because the oligarchs would not allow it. That would spell doom for them. You know what I mean? I know they're pretty divested, but they're hurt. I think they're hurting right now. I think they thought this was going to happen a lot quicker than it really did. The wheat and natural gas exports from Russia and from Ukraine especially have been tamped down over the last year and a half now because of this bullshit. And there's no way they're not heavily invested in both of those things. You know what I mean?
Of course, but I mean, this is the same type of stuff that was the catalyst for in World War II with Japan.
Yep.
You know, you think that you can just use financial sanctions and kick Russia off of SWIFT and steal. I mean, they stole hundreds of billions of dollars of their reserves from the central banks.
Yeah.
Like that's real serious stuff, and the oligarchs take that personally too.
Yeah.
And they're pissed.
I'm sure they weren't thrilled that the CIA blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline either.
Fuck no. Yeah, dude. So it's like these guys still have egos.
People tried to pin that as a false flag on Russia. I'm like, there's no fucking way the oligarchs would have allowed Putin to stay in power. They would have clipped that dude immediately if he had done that to himself. There's no fucking way.
I knew it day of. I tweeted out, "Oh, CIA just blew up Nord Stream," because I was like, "There's no fucking way." I mean, I didn't know it was CIA for sure, but I knew for fucking certain it wasn't Russia.
Yeah.
It could have been MI6. It could have been, some NATO member. It could have been Germany for all I know. But yeah, it's we are awash in the fog of war, as they say, and it's ugly right now.
A lot of this stuff doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, and here's what I think. So people ask me a lot of time about this. Well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? In the broader culture, even here's what I think: corporate America is losing billions of dollars right now from this woke bullshit they've been trying to pull lately. It is not just Budweiser, Bud Light, or Anheuser-Busch. Target has lost billions of dollars and a ton of market share. A lot of these companies have.
Disney too, man.
Yeah, Disney as well. When all this alphabet soup bullshit, rainbow bullshit started, people seemed to think, and still a lot of people still think, I get this all the time, that they're just trying to bilk the community, whatever the fuck that means, and their supporters out of money. And, that's Occam's razor. That's the simplest answer. So maybe there's some credibility to that, but that's not what's happening. They've been losing every time one of these countries steps out on a limb or company steps out on a limb like that, whether it's ESPN or their parent Disney or ABC, who's done it as well. Any of these companies, they always lose money and market share. So if that's the case, then it has to be about something else, right? And I think it's about the ESG, DEI globalist bullshit. And the reason they're doing it isn't to make money. It is to destroy, to challenge and destroy our collective epistemology, right? It is the last paragraph of 1984. In the end, the state would say, or the party would say, that 2 + 2 = 5, and you'd have to believe it because the logic of their position demands it, right? That statement isn't about brainwashing people necessarily, and it's not just about destroying the truth. It's about destroying the truth, because when you're in power and you destroy the truth, then you get to control what the truth is moving forward, right? Yeah. And then anybody that challenges, and anybody that challenges it is a domestic violent extremist or a conspiracy theorist or this or that. And then ultimately you can weaponize. You don't have to stand up a fucking Gestapo to go after these people, because you manufacture consent, and then people will go after their colleagues on their own, their family members on their own. And we're seeing it happen over the last 10 years. People just don't talk to their family members anymore because they didn't want to get a vaccine, or they did. Some people don't talk to their family members who do get vaccines. Like, dude, do what the fuck you want, But that's
We created the brown shirts. We just didn't change our clothing. I mean, that really, I couldn't agree with you more. Because I was a finance guy, when I first started to see marketing campaigns that were absolutely insulting to a customer base, I immediately went into study mode. I was like, I got to figure this out because I'm an entrepreneur. Like I'm fascinated by this. And about 2.5 years ago, I discovered the ESG DEI cabal and the fact that came from the United Nations in 2004, and then the World Economic Forum propagated it to the most wealthy and powerful.
And it's not about making money, right?
Oligarchs.
It's not because they're losing money. So there's got to
Yeah.
be some other reason that they're doing this shit.
No, it's about remaking the world in their image, but it's also about suppressing competition. That's the real key here. Is like, yes, you do lose money short term, but long term, because you've created this all powerful state that's able to regulate and suppress any competitor that's trying to rise up because they don't have an ESG score. They don't have a Human Rights Council, rating that's adequate enough to get a loan from any of these corporate or these financial tycoons, BlackRock, State Street, et cetera. You can't get any finance. So how the fuck do you compete with Disney? Oh, you can't. You can actually rise up. Oh, but I mean, still, we have the internet. We can find our way through the decentralized information stream. Oh, well, no, you can't actually because we have a censorship apparatus that's being rolled out across all social media, YouTube, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. It's like they're trying to crack down on all competition. This is completely anti-free market. This is why it's so incumbent for the conservatives to wrap their minds around this, because the left doesn't believe in capitalism anyways. So I need the right on this one because I don't have enough libertarians to fight this fight. So I really have made put a stake in the ground, like, yo, this is the line. Whether you love trans people or you hate them or whatever, that's not the point. It has nothing to do with any of that. It is about conquest through financial malfeasance. It is ultimately against the fiduciary responsibility. I think it is criminal liability that Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, has committed. But until people understand it, they're really fighting the wrong fight. So we'll see. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, same. Well, look, this has been informative.
Well, good.
There's a lot more to do, obviously, but I think it's a lot of people will come to you with ideas. A lot of people will come to you with ideologies, with messages. I think this is. I think that libertarianism is a message of hope that requires a little bit of personal responsibility, and time will tell over the next 5 or 10 years if people start performing some of the responsibilities required of them to secure their own citizenship, or if they continue to capitulate to state power and let the state do whatever the fuck it wants. You know what I mean? It's gonna the next 10 years will decide whether or not there's a civil war in this country, frankly.
Could not agree more, man.
So we'll see what happens.
I think at its core, libertarianism is about empowerment of the individual, and if that doesn't imbue some hope in you, you got to check your pulse, man. Like that means that you're capable of reclaiming human liberty in your lifetime. That's a fucking beautiful message. That's what inspired me. That's the the flame that I function off of every single day. That's why I leap out of bed and I'm so excited to do what I do every single day. So yeah, I'm just trying to give that light to more people, man. I need more people. I need more people that have stopped giving up on yourself, on this nation, on our philosophy, on our belief in human liberty. These are fucking really important ideals, and they are absolutely on the ropes. So I hope people are inspired, and we'll let's pray, man.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
Well, tell everybody where they can find you on social media, where they can find your shows and all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. At Liberty Lock Pod on Twitter. Joe Rogan followed me 2 days ago. Fucking mind blowing, super exciting for me. Yeah, Liberty Lockdown on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere.
Sweet.
Clint Russell, thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming today, man. I really appreciate it. It's been a good conversation, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.